Look, I've spent more nights than I care to admit leaning against cold brick walls in places like Lower Manhattan or those neon-soaked strips in Vegas, just watching. And I'm telling you, it's not the noise that gets to you. It's the eyes. Jung had this way of talking about the shadow as if it were some philosophical concept. But when you're standing in a room vibrating with bass and the smell of gin, you see that the shadow is a physical weight. I've looked into the eyes of people mid-drink, and what I saw wasn't fun or relaxation. It was a frantic, wide-eyed terror. It's that split second when the glass is halfway to their lips and they realize the person staring back at them in the mirror behind the bar is a complete stranger. They drink because they can't stand the silence of their own company. They drink because the version of themselves they've built, the successful professional, the happy spouse, is a lie that's starting to crack under the pressure of the night. You see it in the way their gaze never quite settles on anything. It's a desperate flicker. They're looking for an exit, any exit, from the reality of who they are when the lights go down. It's like being in a room full of people trying to drown a ghost that knows how to swim. Every shot they take is a frantic attempt to push that ghost back down, to keep the self from stepping out of the dark and asking the questions they aren't ready to answer. I was there, clear-headed, and it felt like watching people set their own houses on fire just to stay warm for a minute. It's not a party, it's a siege. I was walking through the meatpacking district in Manhattan, just as the clubs were starting to bleed people out onto the cobblestones. And it hit me how much of our social life is actually a psychic war zone. Jung talked about the shadow as this hidden basement of the soul. But in these places, the basement door isn't just open. It's been kicked in. I've seen men in $3,000 suits leaning over the bar with a look of absolute raw hunger in their eyes. And they weren't hungry for a drink. They were hungry for a blackout. They were trying to erase the last 10 hours of being a cog in the machine. Sinceramente, it's a terrifying thing to witness someone actively trying to kill their own consciousness. You look at them and you see the split. On the outside they're laughing, shouting over the music, trying to look like they're having the time of their lives. But their eyes are screaming something else. Their eyes are stuck in the shadow. It's that hollow, glassy stare that says the self has left the building and left a ghost in charge. We live in a culture that rewards the mask, the career, the status, the curated life, but provides zero tools for dealing with the monster that grows in the dark when you ignore your own truth. So, we drink. We pour liquid lead over the monster hoping it'll sink. But I've seen it. The more you try to drown it, the more it takes over. By the end of the night, it's not the person talking anymore. It's the shadow acting out all the resentment, the rage, and the loneliness they've been stuffing down since Monday morning. Being the only one awake in that room is like being a witness to a slow-motion car crash of the soul. You see the collision coming a mile away, but they're too busy ordering the next round to even notice they've lost control of the wheel. It's brutal. It's honest. And it's the most common tragedy in America. I remember standing outside a bar in a strip mall in some nameless suburb of Ohio, the kind of place where the wind just feels tired. I watched a guy stumble out, fumbling for his keys, and for a second, our eyes locked. In that moment, the persona he'd been wearing all night, the fun guy, the life of the party, just evaporated. What was left was this shivering, naked anxiety. Jung called it the void, that empty space we all have inside. But in the States, we're taught that the void is a defect you need to fix with a credit card or a bottle. We don't know how to sit with ourselves anymore. We don't know how to look at the parts of us that are small, or petty, or broken, without needing a chemical buffer to soften the blow. Those eyes I saw, they weren't looking at me. They were looking through me, into a future that felt like a brick wall. Most people think they're drinking to loosen up, but they're actually drinking to tighten the lid on the things that keep them awake at night. It's a paradox that'll break your heart if you look at it too long. We spend 40 hours a week building a life we have to spend the weekend escaping from. Sinceramente, it's a scam, a psychic Ponzi scheme. We trade our Monday to Friday sanity for a Saturday night blackout, and we call it living for the weekend. But when you're standing there, watching the neon reflect in a puddle of spilled beer, you realize nobody is living. They're just surviving the intervals between drinks. The shadow isn't some monster under the bed. It's the person you become when you realize your life doesn't fit you anymore, and you're too scared to change the suit. So you drink until the suit feels like it fits. It's a lie that tastes like cheap rye and regret, and I've seen it 1,000 times in 1,000 different towns. There's this specific, haunting vibration you feel in those basement bars in Chicago, or the dive joints in New Orleans, a hum of collective avoidance. You stand there, clear-headed, and you start to realize that the shadow isn't just an individual problem. It's the air we breathe. I've watched people lean into each other, their faces inches apart, screaming to be heard over the jukebox. But they aren't communicating. They're just vomiting their unacknowledged pain into the ether. Jung had this term, projection, and man, alcohol is like fuel for it. Since they can't handle the darkness inside their own chest, they start seeing it everywhere else. In their boss, their spouse, the guy at the next table. The drink gives them the courage to be honest, but it's a distorted, ugly honesty that lacks any actual soul. I've looked into eyes that were once bright and seen them go cold and flat, like a house where the power's been cut off. They think they're finding their true self at the bottom of the glass, but they're actually just letting the most primitive, unevolved parts of their psyche take the wheel. It's a tragedy played out in slow motion under flickering lights. You see the father who's missing his kid's bedtime, the artist who's traded his brush for a bottle, all of them convinced they're just unwinding, but you see the truth. You see the self being dismantled, brick by brick, just to avoid a little bit of psychological discomfort. It's a high price to pay for a temporary truce with your own mind. Sinceramente, it makes me want to scream sometimes. The sheer waste of human light. They're trading their birthright of consciousness for a few hours of not having to feel the weight of being a person. And the worst part? They'll wake up tomorrow even more hollowed out, needing the same poison to fill the hole they dug the night before. I was sitting in a high-end lounge in San Francisco once, the kind of place with velvet chairs and $20 cocktails that taste like nothing, and I realized that the shadow doesn't care how much money you make. Wealth just buys you a more expensive brand of numbness. I watched this woman, perfectly dressed, hair done to a T, but her eyes, they were shifting like she was trapped in a cage. Every time the waiter came by, she'd grab another martini like it was a key to the exit. Jung talked about the collective shadow, and in America, that shadow is built on the myth of having it all. We're a nation of high performers who are secretly dying inside because we've been told that vulnerability is a weakness. So we use alcohol as a chemical handshake to allow ourselves to feel something, even if that something is just a sloppy, blurred version of reality. I saw her hand shake just a little before the gin hit her system, and it was the most honest thing in the room. It was her body saying, "I can't do this anymore," while her mind was screaming, "Just one more and you'll be fine." It's a brutal cycle. We push ourselves to the limit of human endurance during the day, and then we spend the night trying to sedate the very ambition that got us there. Sinceramente, it's a form of self-cannibalism. We're eating our own souls just to keep the persona fed. Being the sober one in that room is like being the only one who can see the cracks in the dam while everyone else is praising the view. You see the exhaustion behind the Botox, the grief behind the laughter, and the immense, terrifying loneliness that comes from being successful, but totally unknown to yourself. It's not a party. It's a wake for the lives we're too afraid to actually live. I remember standing on a balcony in Nashville, looking down at the bachelorette parties screaming in the streets below. That forced fun that feels more like a panic attack. It's a specific kind of American madness, isn't it? This idea that if we just shout loud enough and drink fast enough, the void won't catch up to us. Jung had this concept called participation mystique, where you basically lose your soul to the crowd, and that's exactly what happens when the shots start hitting the table. You stop being an individual and start being part of a hungry, mindless swarm. I've looked at those faces mid-shout, and there's a moment where the mask slips, just for a fraction of a second, and you see a look of pure, unadulterated fatigue. They are tired of being on. They are tired of the performance. But instead of going home and sitting in the dark to find out why they're so exhausted, they order another round. They want to be contained by the group because being alone with their own thoughts feels like being locked in a room with a predator. Sinceramente. It's a hostage situation. Their own psyche is holding them for ransom, and the bottle is the only currency they think works. When you're the only one awake, you see the shadow isn't just a dark corner of the mind. It's the debt collector that comes for all the feelings you refuse to have during the day. Every drink is just a high-interest loan on tomorrow's sanity. You see the hero of the office turning into a weeping mess, the strong mother turning into a bitter ghost. It's all there, spilling out like toxic waste because they don't have a container for their own humanity. They've traded their self for a seat at a table where nobody actually knows anyone else's name. It's a lonely way to be social. I was standing in a parking lot outside a bar in Seattle, watching the rain turn the oil stains on the asphalt into these shimmering, poisonous rainbows. A woman walked past me, leaning on a friend, and she had this look. It's a look I've seen from Boston to LA. It's the look of someone whose inner child has finally been gagged and thrown in the trunk. Jung talked about the puer aeternus, that part of us that stays young and creative. But when you use alcohol to endure your shadow, you aren't staying young. You're just refusing to grow up. You're keeping yourself in a state of arrested decay. I've seen people in their 50s acting out the same dramas they had in their 20s, using the same liquid courage to avoid the fact that their life is a house of cards. Sinceramente, it's a gut punch to see a grown man or woman terrified of a quiet room. They need the jukebox, the clinking glass, the mindless chatter, anything to keep from hearing the heartbeat of their own wasted potential. When you're sober, you see that the shadow isn't actually trying to kill them. It's trying to wake them up. It's the part of them that's screaming, "Hey, you're miserable in this job," or "You don't love this person." But they don't want to hear the truth. The truth is expensive. The truth requires change. So they pour another drink to keep the truth at bay for just one more night, being the witness to that. It's like watching someone die of thirst while they're standing in a river. But they've convinced themselves the water is poison. They'd rather stay parched and safe in their numbness than take a drink of the reality that would actually set them free. It's a slow erosion of the soul, one happy hour at a time. I was nursing a lukewarm coffee in a diner at 4 a.m. in Philadelphia, watching the after-hours crowd crawl in, and it felt like being in a field hospital after a battle nobody won. You see it in the way they sit, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the tabletop, as if it's the only thing keeping them from falling into the floor. Jung talked about the wounded healer, but these people are just wounded animals looking for a hole to crawl into. I've looked into those eyes and seen the absolute horror of the morning after realization starting to creep in before the sun even rises. It's that moment when the chemical curtain starts to twitch, and they get a glimpse of the mess they've made while they were checked out. They didn't just endure their shadow tonight. They gave it the keys to the city, and now they have to live in the wreckage. Sinceramente, it's a specific kind of American tragedy. This idea that we can just reset ourselves with a blackout and start over on Monday morning. But the psyche doesn't work that way. The shadow doesn't go away just because you weren't conscious to see it. It just gets hungrier. I've seen people try to laugh it off, making jokes about how wasted they got, but their eyes are telegraphing a deep, soul-crushing shame. They're terrified that the person who came out last night, the one who screamed at their partner or broke a glass for no reason, is the true self, and the person they are during the day is the lie. They drink to escape the shadow, but they end up becoming it. Being the only one awake in that diner, you realize that the strange ones aren't the people who stay sober. It's the people who think they can spend their whole lives running from themselves and never run out of road. It's a dead end, and I was there to see the exact moment they hit the wall. I was driving through the rain in Portland, past those small, flickering neon signs that look like they're gasping for air. And I realized that the shadow isn't some deep, dark mystery. It's just the bill that eventually comes due. You see it in the eyes of the guy leaning against a lamppost at 2 a.m., looking at his own hands like they don't belong to him. Jung talked about individuation, which is just a fancy way of saying becoming a real person. But what I've seen in those booze-soaked eyes is the exact opposite. It's dissolution. They're dissolving. I've watched people literally melt into the background of a bar, losing their edges, losing their eye. They think they're expanding their minds, but they're just shrinking their world down to the size of a coaster. Sinceramente, it's a terrifying thing to be the only one who remembers the conversation. You realize that for them, the night never happened. They weren't there. Their kids weren't there. Their dreams weren't there. It was just a placeholder for a life. I've looked into eyes that were pleading for someone to notice they were drowning, but the second you try to reach out, the persona kicks back in with a shaky laugh and another order for the road. It's a psychic prison where the inmates are also the guards. We've built a society that's so loud and so demanding that the only way people feel they can hear themselves is by turning the volume down on their own consciousness. But the irony is brutal. When you turn the volume down to 0, there's nobody left to listen. You're just a shell, standing in the rain, wondering why you feel so cold even when the whiskey is burning your throat. So here we are, standing on the edge of the morning in a city like Chicago or LA, watching the street sweepers clean up the glass and the ghosts of last night. You look at the people stumbling toward their cars, and you realize that surviving the shadow isn't a victory if you had to go unconscious to do it. Jung once said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And man, I've seen a lot of people calling their self-inflicted wrecks bad luck, while smelling like a distillery. Being the one who stays awake, the one who actually looks into those desperate, flickering eyes, is a heavy burden. It's a visceral, lonely kind of clarity. You see the shadow for what it really is. It's not a monster to be killed. It's a part of us that just wants to be heard. But instead of listening, we try to bury it in a shallow grave made of ice cubes and cheap gin. Sinceramente, forget the poetic metaphors. It's simpler and uglier than that. Most people are just terrified of being alone with the truth of their own hearts, so they choose a slow, socially acceptable self-destruction instead. They call you strange because your presence reminds them that there's another way, a way that involves standing your ground and looking the dragon in the eye without needing a drink to blur the vision. It's a hard path, and yeah, it's raw and it stings, but at least you're actually there to feel the wind on your face. You're not a ghost in your own life. You're the only one in the room who's truly alive, even if the room is a mess and the lights are too bright. Stay awake. Don't let the fog take you. The world is too damn real to miss it just because you were scared of what you'd find in the dark. In the end, the only thing we really have is our awareness. Don't trade yours for a temporary peace that leaves you hollow by dawn.